The silence before the truth. Keanu Reeves sat alone in his dimly lit room, the soft glow of a single lamp falling across his tired face. Outside, the city was alive with sounds, but inside his heart there was only silence. He had carried a truth for many years, a truth so heavy that it shaped the way he lived, the way he spoke, and the way he cared for others. Yet he had never shared it, not with the public, not even with those closest to him, until tonight. The story began when Sandra Bullock received a call from Keanu. It was late, almost midnight. His voice was calm but heavy, like he was holding back something he had wanted to say for too long. "Can we meet?" he asked. There was no explanation, no details, just those 3 words. Sandra, who had known him for decades, felt something unusual in his tone. She agreed without hesitation. When she arrived, she found him sitting near the window, staring out at the night sky. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. She could see the weight he was carrying, though he had not spoken a word yet. She walked closer, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. "Keanu, what is it?" she asked softly. He turned to her, his expression caught between strength and vulnerability. For a moment, he struggled to find words. His lips parted, then closed again. Finally, he whispered, "There is something I need to tell you. Something I have kept inside for too long." His voice cracked, and Sandra felt her heart tighten. At that moment, she remembered the many times Keanu had shown kindness to strangers, the times he gave without asking for recognition, the moments when he carried grief quietly while smiling for others. He was the man who lifted people when they fell, who gave his seat on the subway, who stood by his friends without ever needing applause. And yet here he was, trembling, as if the truth he held could break him. "You don't have to be afraid," Sandra said, her voice calm and steady. But inside, she was bracing herself. She knew whatever he was about to reveal would not be small. Keanu stood up, walking slowly across the room. Every step felt heavy, as if each carried years of silence. Finally, he stopped and looked directly into her eyes. "I have lived with shadows," he said quietly. "Shadows that remind me of loss, of mistakes, of people I could not save. I show the world my strength, but inside, I have been fighting battles that no one sees." Sandra's eyes filled with tears, though he had not yet told her everything. She could feel the pain behind his words, the weight of hidden memories. "Keanu," she whispered, "you don't have to carry it alone anymore." He looked away as if ashamed. "I'm not afraid of people judging me," he said. "I am afraid that once I speak this truth, it will change how you see me." For a moment, the room was silent. The ticking of a small clock on the table was the only sound. Sandra stepped closer, lifting his chin gently so he would meet her eyes again. "Nothing you say will make me see you differently, because I know who you are. You are the man who carries kindness in every step, who treats every soul with respect. If there is pain in your story, it only makes you more human." His eyes glistened. He wanted to believe her, but doubt still held him back. Finally, he took a deep breath and sat down again. "Then listen," he said, "because once I begin, there will be no turning back." Sandra sat opposite him, her heart pounding. She had no idea what truth he was about to reveal, but she knew it would be something that touched the very core of his life. And as he began to speak, her eyes filled with tears before the words even left his lips. Because sometimes, the soul can feel the weight of truth before the ear hears it. The unspoken wound. The air in the room felt heavy, almost like it was holding its breath along with Sandra. Keanu sat with his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles turning pale. He had always been a man of calm silence, someone who rarely let his inner world spill into the open. Yet tonight, the silence was cracking, and something raw was about to emerge. "It began years ago," Keanu said quietly, his voice so low that Sandra leaned forward to hear him. "There were nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had failed the people I loved most. I built walls around myself, convincing others that I was fine. But inside, I was bleeding." Sandra's throat tightened. She had always sensed a sadness in him, something deeper than what the world could see. He gave so much to others, yet rarely allowed himself the comfort of being vulnerable. Now, watching him fight for words, she felt her own tears pushing forward. Keanu paused, his eyes fixed on the floor. I lost more than I ever spoke about. The pain, the emptiness, it became part of me. People think I choose solitude because I prefer it, but the truth is, solitude became the only place where I could hide my grief. His words carried a weight that pressed down on the room. Sandra felt her chest ache. She wanted to reach out, to hold his hands, but she stayed still, giving him the space he needed to let his truth flow. Keanu took another deep breath, and for the first time, his voice trembled. I never let the world see the side of me that was broken. I feared that if they knew, if they saw the cracks, they would see me as weak. So I buried everything. I smiled. I worked. I gave. I stood strong. But every act of kindness was also a shield, hiding the storms I carried inside. Sandra's tears finally spilled. She covered her mouth with her hand, her heart breaking at the thought of the quiet suffering he had endured. "Keanu," she whispered, "why did you never tell me before? Why carry this alone when you had people who cared?" His eyes lifted slowly to hers, shining with tears he could no longer hold back. Because kindness was easier than confession. If I kept giving to others, maybe I wouldn't feel the emptiness inside. But the truth is, every time I gave, I was trying to heal something in myself. Her tears fell harder. She finally reached out, taking his hand in hers. It was warm but trembling. She squeezed it gently, her own strength flowing through her touch. "You are not weak for hurting, Keanu. You are strong for surviving it, and even stronger for sharing it now." He closed his eyes, letting her words sink into the parts of him that had been locked away. For years, he had carried this hidden wound, and in this moment, he felt the first light of release. But as the silence stretched between them, Sandra noticed something more in his expression. This was not the whole truth. There was still something deeper, something he was holding back. "There's more, isn't there?" she asked gently. Keanu opened his eyes, and the pain inside them was sharp, almost unbearable. "Yes," he whispered. "There is more. The truth I have never spoken. The truth that still haunts me every night?" Sandra braced herself, her heart racing. She could sense that the real revelation was still hidden, waiting like a storm just beyond the horizon. And as he lowered his head, his voice cracked with the weight of it. "This is the part I fear will change everything." The truth beneath the silence, the room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, listening to every word. Sandra's hand still rested gently on Keanu's, but she could feel the weight in him that was not yet spoken. His shoulders were tense, his breathing shallow, as though saying the next words would strip away a piece of himself he had protected for too long. "I never wanted to be a burden," Keanu whispered, his voice breaking. "When I lost the people who meant everything to me, I thought silence was the only way to honor them. I thought if I carried the pain alone, I could protect others from it. But the silence became a prison." Sandra's heart ached. She had seen him smile at strangers, laugh quietly with friends, show endless patience to people who barely knew him. But she had also seen those quiet moments when his gaze drifted away, his eyes distant, as if replaying memories that no one else could see. She understood now that those moments were not just passing thoughts. They were pieces of a hidden grief too heavy to share. Keanu's hands trembled as he continued. "The world sees strength in me. They see kindness, humility, calm. But they don't see the nights I sit awake, haunted by the faces of those I lost. The truth is, every act of kindness I give is a way of keeping their memory alive. I'm not kind because I am free of pain. I am kind because I know what it means to live without it." His words fell heavy, like stones dropping into a silent lake. Sandra's tears flowed freely now, but she did not interrupt. She let the silence stretch, allowing his confession to breathe. Keanu closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they glistened with tears. "I lost someone I loved deeply," he said, his voice trembling. "And not just once. Loss came again and again until I stopped believing in the idea of forever. I told myself I had to accept it, but the truth is, I never did. I buried the grief, but it stayed alive inside me." Sandra's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, to tell him he was not alone. But she knew this was a moment he needed to own fully. So she squeezed his hand tighter, silently telling him she was there, listening, holding the space with him. His breath shook as he went on. I would stand at film premieres, surrounded by lights and cameras, and inside I was empty. People cheered, they smiled, they admired. But none of them saw the man who went home at night and sat in silence. Staring at memories that could never return, Sandra finally whispered, her voice breaking. Keanu, you carried this all alone for so long, but you don't have to anymore. You don't need to fight in silence. He looked at her, his tears finally falling freely down his cheeks. That's what I'm afraid of, he said softly. Once I speak this truth, once I let it all out, there is no going back. The mask will be gone. You'll see me differently. Sandra shook her head, her own tears unstoppable. I will only see you more clearly, and what I see will never be weakness. It will be the strength of someone who survived and still chose to be kind. Keanu's lips trembled into the faintest smile, though his eyes remained full of pain. He looked down at their joined hands, then back into her eyes. Then you should know everything, he whispered. Because the truth is not just about loss. It is about the guilt I carry, the feeling that maybe somehow I could have done more. Sandra's heart clenched. This was the core of his silence, the place where grief had turned into self-punishment. She braced herself as he took a deep breath, preparing to speak the part of his truth that had stayed buried the longest. The guilt he carried, Keanu's chest rose and fell heavily, like each breath was pulled from a place of struggle. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant, as if he was no longer in the room, but standing inside a memory that had never left him. Sandra stayed silent, her hand still holding his, waiting for him to find the strength to continue. When I lost her, Keanu whispered, his voice trembling. I told myself it was fate. I told myself it was out of my control. But deep down, I always wondered, could I have done more? Could I have said something different? Been there sooner? Protected her better? His voice broke and he pressed his hands against his face. The world sees tragedy as something that happens to us. But when it happens to you, it feels like a wound you created yourself. Sandra's tears blurred her vision. She knew the story of his past, the headlines the world had read, but hearing him speak it now was different. It wasn't the public story, it was the private wound. This was not the actor the world admired. This was the man who had carried guilt in silence for years, believing he had failed the people he loved most. You didn't fail, Sandra whispered through her tears. You gave everything you had. Sometimes life takes more than anyone can give. Keanu lowered his hands, his face wet with tears. He shook his head slowly. I know what people say. They say it wasn't my fault. But try telling that to the nights when I can't sleep. Try telling that to the moments when I hear laughter in the street and remember the silence in my own home. Guilt doesn't listen to reason. It only listens to the echo of what could have been. Sandra reached out, both her hands now covering his. She leaned closer, her voice steady but full of pain. Keanu, you are not guilty for what life has taken from you. You are only guilty of loving too deeply, and there is no shame in that. His eyes softened at her words, but the storm inside him did not fade. You don't understand, he whispered. I live with the thought that maybe if I had fought harder, if I had been stronger, things would have been different. I carry the image of her smile, and I ask myself every day, why couldn't I protect it? The rawness in his voice cut through Sandra's heart. She could not stop her tears. You protected what mattered most, she said firmly. Her smile lives in you. Every time you are kind, every time you give without asking, every time you show humility, you protect her memory. You protect her love. Keanu's lips trembled. He wanted to believe her, but years of silence had taught him to doubt comfort. He looked away, his gaze falling on the faint glow of the lamp in the corner. I don't deserve forgiveness, he whispered. Not from the world, not from myself. Sandra squeezed his hands tighter, her voice fierce now. Then let me hold the forgiveness for you. Let me remind you that you are not defined by loss, but by the way you chose to rise after it. Keanu, you gave the world kindness when the world gave you pain. That is not guilt. That is grace. His tears fell harder, but for the first time his body relaxed slightly, as though a small part of the burden had lifted. He looked at her with a fragile smile, broken yet grateful. You always had a way of seeing what others could not, he whispered. Sandra's tears streamed down, but she smiled through them. And you always had a way of hiding what should have been shared. But not anymore. Not tonight. Keanu nodded slowly, a long silence stretching between them. The truth was out now, but the night was not over. He had spoken of guilt and grief, but there was still something left, something he had never admitted to anyone, not even himself. His eyes grew distant again, and Sandra felt a chill as she realized the depth of what was still locked away. The secret within the heart, the room had grown quieter, though nothing around them had changed. It was as if the world outside no longer mattered. Only the truth between them existed now. Keanu's face was pale, his eyes still shining with tears, but there was something else in his expression, something deeper than grief or guilt. Sandra could see it, the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath caught before he spoke again. "There's something I've never told anyone," Keanu whispered, his voice almost breaking under the weight of his own words. "Not the press, not the people closest to me. I kept it locked inside because I thought no one would understand. Maybe I even thought I didn't deserve to speak it out loud." Sandra leaned in, her hands still holding his tightly, her heart beating faster. She had already heard so much pain, so much guilt. But she sensed that this was different. This was not just about what he had lost. It was about something he had hidden from the world, maybe even from himself. He lowered his head, his voice trembling. "After all the loss, after the silence, after the guilt, there was something else I carried, a truth that scared me more than grief. I realized that I didn't know how to live anymore. I knew how to survive, how to smile for the world, how to give kindness to others. But I didn't know how to let kindness come back to me. I didn't know how to let myself be loved." Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Tears spilled from her eyes faster than before. She reached out, touching his face with trembling fingers, her heart breaking at the vulnerability in his words. Keanu closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as though it was something unfamiliar, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. "I built a wall," he whispered, "a wall that even the kindest people could not break through. I thought if I kept myself locked away, I couldn't lose anyone again. But that wall also kept me from the one thing I needed most, love. I turned myself into a shadow, Sandra. I became a man who gave love but never truly accepted it." Sandra could no longer hold back her sobs. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, their tears mixing in silence. "You don't deserve to live in shadows, Keanu," she said through her tears. "You deserve the light. You deserve love as much as anyone else, maybe more because of all you've endured." His lips trembled, but he could not speak. The years of silence had taught him to swallow words, to hide feelings, to mask pain with humility. But in this moment, with Sandra holding him, the mask was falling apart. Finally, he whispered, "I was afraid that if I let someone close, they would see the broken pieces inside me and walk away. I thought I was safer behind silence." But silence. It only made the emptiness louder. Sandra lifted his face so he would look into her eyes. Her voice was steady now, filled with determination. "You are not broken, Keanu. You are human. You are strong because you endured. But you are beautiful because you still choose kindness despite the pain. Love does not run from scars. It finds them, and it heals them." Keanu's tears fell harder, but for the first time his eyes carried a fragile hope. It was faint, buried under years of fear and loss, but it was there, flickering like a candle in the dark. He leaned back, breathing deeply, as if releasing something that had been locked in his chest for far too long. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was soft, filled with the sound of healing beginning. But as Sandra wiped her tears, she saw it again, that flicker in his eyes, the unspoken weight that still lingered. He had revealed his guilt, his grief, his fear of love, but she could feel there was one more truth, the deepest one, the one he had buried so far down that even now he struggled to touch it. The final shadow Keanu sat in silence, his eyes locked on the faint glow of the lamp. His tears had slowed, but his breathing still carried the weight of someone standing at the edge of a truth too heavy to lift. Sandra did not let go of his hands. Her touch was steady, a silent reminder that he was not alone. "There's one more thing," he whispered, his voice raw. "The part of me I've never spoken aloud. The part I always kept hidden, even from myself. Sandra leaned closer, her heart aching. She had heard his grief, his guilt, his fear of love. But the way he said those words sent a chill through her. This was deeper, darker, something he had locked away for years. He lowered his head, his voice trembling as if each word cost him strength. The truth is, I blamed myself for being alive. After losing them, after watching everything I loved slip away, I asked myself why I was still here. Why me? Why did I get to breathe when they didn't? It felt unfair, like life had spared me for no reason. And that guilt, it turned into a shadow that followed me everywhere. Sandra's tears came again, harder than before. Her chest tightened, her whole body trembling as she listened. This was not just grief or guilt. This was the deepest wound of all. The wound of believing his very existence was undeserved. Keanu's voice cracked as he went on. I smiled for others. I gave what I could, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a man who didn't deserve to be standing there. I thought maybe if I gave enough kindness, if I carried enough humility, it would balance the scales. But the truth is, nothing ever felt enough. Sandra broke into quiet sobs. She pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around him, holding him tightly, as though her embrace could shield him from the years of torment he had carried inside. Keanu, she whispered into his shoulder, you were never undeserving. You were spared because the world needed you. The kindness you gave wasn't a debt, it was a gift. You are a light in the dark and you were meant to be here. His body shook in her arms, his tears falling freely. For the first time, he allowed himself to be held, to let someone carry the weight with him instead of fighting alone. After a long silence, he pulled back, his eyes red and swollen, but softer than before. I never let anyone see this side of me, he admitted, because I thought they would see weakness, but you see me and you don't turn away. Sandra cupped his face, her tears flowing but her voice steady. Because what I see is not weakness. What I see is a man who has lived through storms and still chose to be gentle. What I see is resilience. What I see is strength wrapped in humility. And that truth, it makes you more human, more real, more extraordinary than anyone could ever know. Keanu's lips trembled into a fragile smile, his tears catching the light. For the first time, the burden he carried seemed to shift, not gone, but lighter, shared. But even as he felt the release, there was still a silence between them. Not heavy, not dark, but waiting for the moment when this truth would not only free him, but connect them in a way that neither expected. Sandra leaned closer, her own heart racing, and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with your truth. But now, Keanu, what do you want for yourself after all of this?" His eyes met hers, and in them was something new, something vulnerable but hopeful. The healing begins. The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. It was not heavy with shadows. It was soft, like a fragile breath after years of holding it in. Sandra's question still hung in the air. What do you want for yourself after all of this? Keanu looked at her, his eyes still red from tears, his face marked with pain, but there was something new there now, something fragile but alive. He let the silence stretch, searching within himself for the words he had never dared to speak. Finally, his voice came, low and trembling. "I want to live," he whispered. "Not just survive, not just carry pain in silence. I want to live in a way that honors those I lost, but also gives me permission to feel joy again. I want to believe that love can find me, that kindness is not just something I give, but something I can receive." Sandra's heart broke open at his words. She had waited all night, listening to his hidden truths, his guilt, his grief, his shadows. And now, here it was, the desire he had buried so deeply. Not for fame, not for recognition, not even for relief. Simply to live, to allow himself the right to feel alive again. Her tears fell as she leaned closer, her voice shaking with emotion. "Then you must. Because you deserve that, Keanu. You deserve more than shadows. You deserve mornings filled with light, days filled with laughter, nights where silence feels like peace instead of punishment. And if love comes to you, let it in. Don't hide from it anymore. Keanu's lips trembled into a faint, broken smile. Do you really think I can? Sandra cupped his face in her hands, her own tears streaming. I don't just think, you already are. Tonight you chose to share what you hid for years. Tonight you let someone hold your truth. That is the first step of living. And from here you will take another step, and then another. And I will be here to remind you, every time you forget, that you are worthy. His tears came again, but this time they carried something different. Not just pain, but release. His body shook with sobs, but they were softer now, as if the grief was loosening its grip. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the comfort of closeness. Without fear, without walls. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for seeing me even when I couldn't see myself. Sandra held him tightly, her arms strong around his trembling body. You were never invisible, Keanu. You only forgot your own light, but I see it. The world sees it, and one day you will see it too. The lamp flickered softly, the night outside stretching endlessly, but inside that small room, something had shifted. The shadows were still there, but they were no longer suffocating. For the first time, Keanu allowed himself to believe that healing was possible. He pulled back, his face still wet with tears, but his eyes carried a fragile strength. Maybe the truth was never meant to break me, he said quietly. Maybe it was meant to free me. Sandra smiled through her tears. Exactly. And now that you've spoken it, the healing can begin. They sat together in silence, but it was a new kind of silence. No longer a prison, no longer a shadow. It was a silence of peace, of understanding, of connection. And as Sandra looked at him, her tears glistening, she realized that his hidden truth had not just changed him, it had changed her too. It reminded her that even the strongest souls carry wounds, and even the gentlest hearts sometimes need to be held. The night slowly faded into dawn, golden light seeping through the window. Keanu watched the first rays of sunlight touch the city, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel alone.